From the European Parliament in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thanks for joining us tonight. This is what we have on the program for you. Caught in the middle. Iran suspends key nuclear commitments as pressure piles on Europe to respond. Drumming up support, Libya's prime minister continues his European tour in Paris while fighting a strongman assault back home. New kids on the block. The UK is in for EU elections, and two Brexit-obsessed parties want to shake things up. Vox backfire. A Lord of the Rings actor lashes out at Spain's far right for using his character to win support. And dancing for votes. The election down under gets weird in tonight's Raw Moment. All right, it is time to meet our panelists this evening. Joining us is Shada Islam. She's Director of Europe and Geopolitics at Friends of Europe. Shada, which of these stories are you watching closely?
Libya. It has such an impact on Europe because, you know, we're dependent on Libya for our oil imports, oil and gas, also for managing migration. And, of course, Europe is divided on Libya, as are the Arab states. So quite an interesting geopolitical story.
And still no answer to migration is there. All right, but joining us also tonight is Beatrice Rios. She's a reporter at Euractiv. What about you, Beatrice?
I think the Buxton story is really interesting. I don't know if you have seen it, but Viggo Mortensen was really upset. He wrote a letter to the editor of a Spanish newspaper, El País, in which he was saying that it was really stupid.
Quite strongly, yeah?
Yeah, indeed, that the far right was using a character which is a multilingual statesman who is in favor of the integration of different cultures and ethnicities to actually defend a far right anti-migration political
Aragorn,
party.
Character of Aragorn there. All right, and also joining us in the studio, Fabrice Potier, Chief Strategy Officer at Rasmussen Global and former NATO strategist. What about you, Fabrice?
Well, Iran for the opposite reason than Shada on Libya, because Iran is where you have an EU foreign policy, and yet we are at the point of failure.
Oh,
so I think this is quite telling story also.
Failure, such a big word, especially for a really important piece of policy here in the EU. That's exactly where we are beginning tonight, with a warning from Iranian President Hassan Rouhani to European world powers: protect us from American sanctions, or we'll tear up the nuclear agreement. He gave it a 60-day deadline for France, Britain, Russia, Germany, and China to act, or Iran would start enriching uranium. Well, American Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, he hit back from London, fresh from a surprise trip to Iraq. He has been trying to secure American support in the Middle East amidst rising tensions with Iran. The United States has also deployed aircraft carrier USS Abraham to the region. Well, let's take a listen to what President Rouhani's warning was.
از این اقدام ما بهانه‌جویی بکنن و پرونده ایران را به شورای امنیت برگردانند، با یک اقدام بسیار قاطعی روبرو خواهند شد و این اقدام قاطع رو هم من در این نامه برای 5 کشور توضیح دادم.
We've also been getting other responses. The Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, he met his Iranian counterpart Mohammad Javad Zarif in Moscow today, and he said that he would discuss the unacceptable situation, those are his words, that had been exacerbated by the United States. While Israel's leader Benjamin Netanyahu, he vowed not to allow Iran to acquire nuclear arms. Let us hear those responses from both Israel and Russia.
בבוקר הזה, בדרכי לכאן, שמעתי שאיראן מתכוונת להמשיך בתוכנית הגרעין שלה. לא נאפשר לאיראן להשיג נשק גרעיני. נוסיף להיאבק במבקשי נפשנו, וננעץ את שורשינו עמוק עוד יותר באדמת המולדת.
Намерение Соединенных Штатов посылать свои авианосцы в район Персидского залива и в целом усиливать там свое военное присутствие, намекая на готовность применить силу. Вы знаете, это стало уже манерой поведения наших американских коллег, к сожалению, будь то на Ближнем Востоке, будь то в Персидском заливе, или будь то в отношении Венесуэлы. Это все прискорбно.
Well, the Iranian nuclear question threatens to overshadow a meeting of EU leaders starting in Romania. And for more on that, we are joined from Sibiu by our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. Darren, you know, this is becoming the bigger story over there. What are EU leaders saying about President Rouhani's statement this morning?
Yeah, indeed. We know there has been somewhat of a chasm in foreign policy differences between Donald Trump and the European Union when it comes to things like, to a degree, Venezuela, also on this issue of NATO spending, and now, of course, significantly, and has been for a while, on Iran. And Donald Trump has been ratcheting up the pressure, hasn't he, on Iran in the last couple of months or so, not only reimposing those sanctions a year ago, but also designating the Islamic Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization, and recently not renewing those sanction waivers to continue to allow some European countries to continue to buy the oil. And that is why Iran is feeling the economic pressure, and it's why the Iranians today have essentially put the EU in somewhat of a bind. We know that the three big powers in Europe, Germany, France and the UK, are very much trying to keep this deal alive. They have been for the last year. So far, that has worked. The Iranians have continued to comply with this nuclear agreement, but they've now given them a 60-day deadline, the European Union, to come up with a decision. Either the deal is done and broken, and sanctions will have to be reimposed, or they can find some way around it. And it must be said, the EU have been attempting, Tessa, over the last while or so, to try and find a way around these sanctions, to limited success. But clearly, recent moves by the United States has made this incredibly difficult. And reaction today is pretty scathing. Theresa May, the British Prime Minister, has said that the deal is crucial and that Britain would ensure it remained in place as long as Iran upheld its commitments. The French also got involved, saying they would do everything to keep the deal alive, but again added that there would be consequences and possibly sanctions if the deal was not adhered to. And the Germans also said that they remain fully committed to its pledges on the deal if it was reciprocated. So the message clearly from those foreign ministers, and I think it'll be reiterated here tomorrow in Cebu, is that yes, they are willing to try and keep this deal alive. They're willing to try and find ways around the increased US sanctions as long as Iran continues to adhere to those, essentially, to the sanctions that have been in places. But in addition to that, it must be added that they are, as I say, stuck between this really difficult place between the Trump administration imposing these sanctions and trying not to cripple EU businesses that may want to continue to trade with Iran. As you say, going to be a big issue tomorrow. It'll be interesting to see what the leaders have to say.
All right, thanks for that, Darren McCaffrey there. I'm picking up on what he was saying there. Indeed, the EU is stuck between a rock and a hard place. You have the Trump administration on one side, and on the other hand, you want to keep the Iranians on side. We heard there the conditions that the leaders were saying. We're going to keep the deal if Iran sticks to its heart. But we already heard what Rouhani has said. So if this is the case, should the EU still be backing this deal if Iran does renege on a couple of those key elements in the deal?
Tessa, that hasn't happened yet. I think for the moment, let's believe in what the Iranians are saying, that they will stick to the deal for the next 60 days when the EU is trying to work out some kind of walk the talk scenario. This is not the first time that these things have happened. We've always come to the crunch and then, we've found a deal. So I'm hoping this will happen this time around. But I'm really worried, I'll tell you, because the Americans are really following the Israeli-Saudi agenda to ostracize Iran, forgetting the importance of Iran as a Muslim power. This is the month of Ramadan, And at the same time, you have this aggression, if you like, assertiveness vis-a-vis Tehran, and in Libya, the confusion as well. So, you have to ask yourself, what is this world coming to? And is America really listening to the Iranians or seeing it through the Israeli-Saudi prism? And I think it's the latter.
But that's an important point with America on board. And you strike an optimistic tone, but when we talked earlier about this, you were talking about failure. So this is the crown jewel of the EU's foreign policy. Should we just come out and say it? It's failing.
Well, that's exactly the problem. I think the EU in itself and the three member states have invested far too much in keeping the deal alive. Not that they should have dropped it, but they should have also pushed the Russians and the Chinese to step in much more than they are, because we should not forget that they also signed the deal. And yet they stayed in the background, letting the EU and especially Germany, France and the UK to carry the water. So I think it's also about the EU3 managing to get the Chinese and the Russian to be a bit more on the scene and a bit more willing to put pressure, especially Russia, since Iran is one of Russia's close allies in the region. But I think what's important is you are in an electoral context in Iran, And I think Rouhani is trying to show that he's tough, that he's putting a deadline, but in a way, as a way also to save the deal. But he needs to kind of be careful not to be attacked by the more extreme, hard voices that are going to play very, very actively ahead of the elections. And I think what the EU needs to do is probably a Turkey-type deal, where I think that's what Rouhani said. We are, helping on fighting narcotics. We are keeping 3 million Afghan refugees at our border.
So very practical.
I think there will have to be some economic deal behind.
But quickly, Beatrice, in this sense, if we following from what Fabrice was saying, if the EU works with China and Russia a lot more, do you think the US will play a lesser role and therefore will be less inclined, as Shada was saying, to use the word bullying or putting pressure on the EU?
Well, that's the problem with this deal. First of all, we never expected to have an ally in the US that would withdraw with such an agreement that was so important on diplomatic ways. And then we also have the possibility that if we play along with Russia and China, the reaction from the US can be much more strong than the one that we have now.
That's 3 against 1, though.
Exactly. So it's going to be important again to strengthen the position in between all the allies to keep the deal alive.
Okay. Well, let's get a little bit more analysis from this and, how politicians actually feel by the rising tensions and the response that the EU could bring forward. Let's talk to a Portuguese MEP and who's joining us from Lisbon, Ana Gomes from the Socialists and Democrats group. Ana, do you feel that the US is walking all over Europe in this issue?
Well, I think this is a very dangerous situation. It's about avoiding another war in our neighborhood, a war of unpredictable consequences. Of course, this reaction by Iran is a reaction to the Trump administration attitude 1 year ago to drop out of the JCPOA. We have an interest in working with Iran. There are many things in which we disagree, namely on human rights, but we cannot alienate the population of Iran who wants normalcy. And we've just seen the floods recently. They could not help the people because they didn't have the spare parts, the helicopters. We need to trade with Iran. We need to bring Iran into responsible behavior in the region. And the JCPOA is the right way. And we should not head into the extreme right wing in the Trump administration and in the Israeli administration. I think we Europeans need to speak with a voice.
So what you're
stick
saying
to the
is
JCPOA and put the barter agreement working, and do not allow the European companies to get out of that process.
Okay, just to simply put, are you just saying that we pretty much ignore what the US is saying as much as possible and keep Iran on side? That's what the EU should be doing.
To me, more important than the reaction of Russia and China at this moment and working with them is actually having the Europeans work together. Having a European voice, we can make the difference. As we did to have the JCPOA at that time working together with the Obama administration, we must make this agreement survive. It's a question of avoiding another war in our neighborhood. And it's a question of not yielding to the extreme myths in the Trump administration, Bolton people and the extremists in Israel who want war. We don't want war. That's why we need to indeed work with Iran. There are powers in the region, namely Saudi Arabia, who are actually much more dangerous and much more involved in terrorist activities than Iran. We need to work with Iran, and we need to reach out to those moderates in Iran who want normalcy.
Okay, thank you for joining us from Lisbon there, Ana Gomes. All right, just to pick up on what Ana was saying, when we talk about Israel's worries there, they have legitimate right to be worried, do they?
Yes, they do. And I think where we disagree with Ana is we should not just focus on the nuclear side of things. And indeed, we should do everything to maintain that deal. But that deal was never about also addressing other real concerns shared with the US and Israel: terrorism, the Iranian regional posture and disruptive approach to the broader region and even to Eastern Africa. And I think this is the chance and I know President Macron has been trying to work with President Trump and trying to find a way, how can we contain better Iran on the things that are problematic, that Iran does in Iraq, in other places, and as a way also to get the US pressure off a bit, and in order to preserve the nuclear side. So let's not think and put that Iran is all good. I think Iran also has some problematic sides and they need to be addressed.
Absolutely. I agree with that, Tessa. I agree with that. But it was a step-by-step approach. And I do agree with you that broader issues of, human rights and regional organizations and regional integration should be taken into account. But you have to go step by step. And from day one, Israel and the United States has been against the JCPOA. And in a sense, you talked about Germany, France, and the UK, but Federica Mogherini, the EU High Representative, and before her, Javier Solana, have really invested in this kind of an agreement. It is her legacy that's at stake as well. And I think, frankly, she's going to try very hard to bring everyone back on track. The Americans are not going to let this go. They have been against the Iranian deal from day one. Obama wanted it, sort of, and Trump from day one was against it. So I agree with you, Fabrice, that broader issues should be discussed, but we have to go step by step. And this was the immediate danger, right? A nuclear Iran. And we're trying to stop that from happening. And if we bring all the issues into the basket at this stage, we're not going to get anywhere.
Okay, so very quickly, Beatrice, before we move on, so where do you think this is headed now?
Well, we're going to see what's going to be the decision of the EU, because now the leaders are meeting in Sibiu, and what the EU was trying to do was to go around the sanctions of the US in Iran and trying to
find ways to continue business with Iran and keep it economically.
But that has not worked, because the problem is that most of the companies that are present in Iran also has businesses in the US. So if you have to decide whether or not to ignore these sanctions in the US and therefore from the US and therefore remain in Iran, you know that you're going to have trouble in businesses in the US. So most of the companies are actually leaving the country.
So maybe they should find ways to compensate for what companies would have to go through. I don't know.
No, that's what the EU has been trying to do, but it's really complicated. So we're going to see if there is an alternative to what the EU has already put in place.
Okay, well, there's 60 days for that, and let's see if something comes out of it. And of course, as the leaders are meeting in Romania, it is not just Iran on the agenda at tomorrow's meeting. There are plenty of other things, problems, if you will, that the EU leaders want to discuss. So let's go back to Darren McCaffrey in Sibiu there. So Darren, what else are we to hear from the leaders there?
Indeed, welcome back to Sibiu. We are in the old capital of Transylvania, in the centre of Romania. Of course, Romania has got the rotating EU presidency at the moment. Tess, I have to say, it's all rather nice. Preparations are well underway for the summit. Tomorrow, the red carpet being rolled out over there where leaders will meet. They're also setting up some artwork here in the centre. And then later on tomorrow night, the 27 leaders, minus Theresa May, who won't be here, are going to listen to a concert with some Romanian music. It should be said this was the capital of culture in Europe just a couple of years ago. What is on the agenda? Well, they're going to set out their agenda, the EU's agenda for the next 5 years from 2019 to 24, ranges everything from protecting citizens and freedoms, all about trying to ensure that people feel safe and free, to developing Europe's economy, and also in this document, they've supplied to the press, building a greener, fairer and more inclusive society. Big, broad thoughts in many regards. One of the interesting things, though, Tessa, that they will be talking about is precisely how they're going to deal with three big decisions they'll have to make later on this year. Who will replace Donald Tusk, who will replace Jean-Claude Juncker, and Mario Draghi, who is the head of the European Central Bank. Those three big jobs are all up for grabs, and it is clear that they're going to try and work out a process over the next couple of months to try and see if they can essentially decide pretty quickly who should take over those positions. It took several months for Donald Tusk, for example, to get appointed back in 2014. They do not want a repeat of that. And there is much talk that there will be an announcement of a special meeting 2 days after the European elections on May 28th in Brussels to try and set out that agenda. So a lot to discuss, not least of all Iran. Leaders meeting here from midday local time tomorrow.
All right, thanks for that, Darren. Looking forward to that as well. All right, we don't have much time, but we'll do a very quick round. What are you watching for tomorrow?
Some hope for European citizens. We have the elections coming up to the European Parliament. I don't want intricate statements, declarations of intent. I want them to talk about an empowered Europe, not a protective Europe. I mean, this makes Europeans look like babies who need to be sheltered, and that's not
so empowered,
the case.
not protection. What about you, Beatrice? What are you watching for tomorrow?
And see what's going to happen with the Spitzenkandidaten system that we think it's under threat, and it's going to be interesting to watch because citizens are also following that.
And Fabrice.
Whether Europe can still mean something as a whole and not just be a fragmented sum. You already hear of 8 member states who are pushing for more things on climate change in the declaration. So I think the real challenge in the coming years is whether we can still be more than the sum of our parts.
There you go. And relevance, perhaps, of the bloc as a whole. OK, now the summit will be one of Jean-Claude Juncker's last as Commission President. And he is already reflecting on his successes and his failures in Europe's top job. So here's a moment of honesty from him.
What did I do wrong? I can tell you. 2 things. One personal, one political. When I was starting my mandate, this LuxLeaks affair appeared. And I had 1 week too much to respond to that. I should have responded immediately. The second mistake I made was to listen too carefully to the British government, Cameron, because the then Prime Minister asked me not to intervene in the referendum campaign. It was a mistake not to intervene and not to interfere, because we would have been the only ones to destroy the lies which were circulated around. I was wrong to be silent at an important moment.
Indeed, a moment of honesty there. OK, it's hindsight is 2020. Just very quickly, Shada, do you think he was right? But in terms of Brexit, maybe it would have turned off a lot of people saying, stop interfering. That was already the problem before.
It could have, but I think he's right. We should have. We should all have taken a part and participated in that discussion. It's Europe. We're all part of it. And this was about a country leaving the EU. We should all have been there. Think tanks, academics, civil society, NGOs, media. We should all have participated. We should have been noisy. And convincing, right?
Well, all right. Well, there you go. Here we are now. OK, well, coming up on Raw Politics, the EU elections are on in Britain. How 2 new parties are trying to shake things up. Plus, how a Lord of the Rings star got caught up in an off-screen political battle. That's coming after the break.
It's regrettably not going to be possible to finish that process before the date that's legally due for the European parliamentary elections. We'd like to be in a situation where those MEPs from the UK never actually have to take their seats in the European Parliament, and certainly to get this done and dusted by the summer recess.
Welcome back to Raw Politics. Speaking there was David Lidington, the UK's Deputy Prime Minister, confirming that the UK will be running in the upcoming EU elections, as there is no time to agree a deal beforehand. Now, to get more on this, let's cross now to our correspondent in London, Tig Enright, who is there for us. Tig, can you tell us about this announcement and how it went down in London?
Hi, Tessa. Well, I don't think there was any big surprise in this becoming the outcome to all this. There was an air of inevitability to it throughout, but it certainly does give Theresa May's critics even more ammunition to use against her. And another election in just over a couple of weeks, at which the Conservatives are not expected to poll terribly well. And of course, this comes off the back of a pretty withering election result, local election result for the Conservatives in England and Northern Ireland last week, more than 1,000 seats lost. But, you know, it really just adds up to a stack of concerns for Theresa May. It feels like every day here, one of her own MPs calls for her to resign. It's just part of the noise here, I think, at this stage. And today in Parliament, she faced down another one of those critics and said, listen, if you wanted me to deliver Brexit, we should have voted for my withdrawal agreement. And I've told you when I'll resign, and that's when my withdrawal agreement is ratified.
Tiger, you talk about noise. It is getting noisy as new parties arrive, to take part in these elections. You have Change UK. You have Nigel Farage's Brexit party. So what do these new parties coming up mean for the mainstream parties?
Well, Tessa, the Brexit Party, Nigel Farage's new vehicle, is expected to absolutely wipe the floor with the Conservatives in these local, or rather these European elections coming up in just a couple of weeks' time. They're leading the polls, having come out of absolutely nowhere, albeit with a very well-known and charismatic leader. And he expects to pick up not just Conservative, but Labour voters too. This is what Nigel Farage had to say at his election campaign launch yesterday.
We've had enough. We will not be lied to and deceived anymore by our political class. We've got a huge number of people in this country out there who sympathise with us. They're Conservative voters, they're Labour voters. In many cases, they're people who voted in that referendum who'd never voted before in their lives. And I would just finish with this message. Don't underestimate us. We know what we're doing. The Conservative Party and the Labour Party, our two-party system is broken. It's not fit for purpose. They're serving nothing but themselves. And it's the Brexit Party that is going to try and break that. And that may be highly ambitious. It may be a difficult thing to do, but that is what we're going to try and do.
And as we said, even Conservative Party insiders are talking about voting for the Brexit Party too. But for Change UK, well, it's a lot less straightforward because, of course, there is a very crowded Remain field, and it will be competing for those pro-European votes with the Liberal Democrats and with the Green Party too. There was talk of an electoral pact when they formed, but they refused initially to get into one, saying that those old parties have too much baggage. There are actually some signs that there might be a change of heart on that issue just today. But yes, while those old parties might have some baggage, they also have plenty of experience in running a political party and having the local infrastructure that's necessary to run an electoral campaign. And that's really come back to bite Change UK since their formation. They've had all kinds of problems. 2 names in their short history. Just last night they tried to re-register, give themselves a new Twitter handle, only to find their old Twitter handle of the independent group taken by a hard Brexiteer group. And lots of problems with their candidates too. Some of those selected were immediately deselected or withdrew from the race because skeletons emerged out of their closet. So while they launched in a blaze of publicity and optimism some months ago, I think it's unlikely that many of them will be smiling come results day.
Thanks for that, Tig, there in London. And joining us here in the studio to discuss this is Dan Dalton, a British MEP from the European Conservatives and Reformists Group. And still with us is Shada Islam from Friends of Europe and Fabrice Potier from Rasmussen Global. Dan, good to see you there. So, we're talking about Brexit taking centre stage again. Do you think this is almost like a second referendum on Brexit?
I think it's more complex than that. I mean, in many ways, it's actually rerunning the 2014 European elections, which actually Nigel Farage with UKIP did pretty much the same thing as people are predicting he will do this time. I mean, I think 2 weeks out of the election then, it was exactly the same debates that were going on. People thought UKIP were really going to wipe the floor.
So you don't think people are actually going to vote for, I am for Brexit, I'm anti-Brexit, or I'm just annoyed at how Brexit is being treated?
But it's more complicated than that because, I mean, as a Conservative Party, we are supportive of Brexit. We are trying to deliver Brexit. We're just trying to deliver a slightly different Brexit to the one that the Brexit Party are proposing. And I think Labour Party, we don't know what their policy is. So I think it's a bit more complex than just a second referendum, a sort of fake second referendum, if you like.
OK, and Shada, you were reacting to when Nigel Farage was speaking there, and he said they know what they're doing, don't underestimate us. So what kind of impact would that have? Because it looks like they're going to be successful.
Very confident.
Yeah.
He always is. But I think it's time that others became just as confident as well, because I think there should be a pact between the Labour, the Greens and the Change UK. I think that's what we need. I'm sorry, you're Conservative, but I really think we need these parties to come together on a common platform and to fight these elections on that platform, which is Remain. And that will turn into a second referendum.
But the Labour position is not Remain.
No,
the Labour position is Leave at the moment.
Absolutely, that's right. And that's the complication, obviously, in all this. But I think it makes everything very exciting at the European Parliament because, people are going to go out and vote. I hope so. I hope your party can bring them out.
Confidence. You think that confidence is will be reflected in the votes, in the polls?
Well, you have to see, but indeed, it's very complex, especially where the Labour Party is standing. But I really personally feel sorry for Dan and British MEPs who basically find themselves both in and out. And I think that lack of clarity is both undermining further the British government's position and also, I think, confusing European voters in general about, what's the next step for Europe as a whole. So I think it's a pretty sorry state of where we are.
Yeah, it is complicated, definitely. Like who's supposed to be on this side yet is on the other side is represented that. But What's interesting also is seeing all these little parties coming up, not just in the UK, but
everywhere.
Everywhere.
Absolutely.
What does that say about single issue parties? What does it say about voter sentiment?
Well, it says that European elections are also the opportunity for small parties to exist.
Right.
This is at least the case in France, where or in the UK, where it's very hard to get first past the post, or in France to get through the parliamentary or presidential elections. So it's the way for them to exist and possibly to get some seats in the European Parliament.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's abnormal, but
maybe
more for
in the
British,
UK, the British point of view, how is that? Is it
But
the two-party system pretty much done?
No, I mean, I think the two-party system will survive. But the fact is we're having a slight realignment because the referendum and sort of attitudes towards leave or remain are now taking the centre stage on politics. So as a result, you have people who maybe are Labour voters but voted for Brexit, who now don't know where to go.
That's right.
And I mean, that's
so why do you say
replicated
it will
across the
survive? Why are you so confident that it will survive? And
Because
is it a bad thing that if it doesn't,
Well, I mean, the first past the post system, when you come to a general election, the problem is you need broad support across the whole country to get any seats. And I think even UKIP showed that. They won 24 MEPs in the last European election, and they didn't get a single MP in the next general election. I think that's the reason why these small parties can do quite well in the European election, but that doesn't mean that they're going to change the two-party system.
And what about from the broader European
Well,
context?
that is changing as well.
Right.
I mean, we know now that that consensus, the grand bargain between the European People's Party and the SND group, I mean, that's not going to be there anymore. You've got ALDE joining forces with Renaissance, with the Macron movement. You've got the Greens coming in. I think it's going to be a much more exciting European Parliament. I was sick of the way the deals were done, and they were really not very transparent, not very democratic. You have to say that as well.
There are two sides to that.
Change.
Do you think it is more democratic to have, so many parties like in France? You're 33, I think, now in France from 24. It used to be 24, now it's 33.
Okay. Yeah.
So now that it's increased, on the other hand, it's so hard to build consensus or, coalition governments and just feel stuck. So
but it might be healthier for European democracy because it won't be a duopoly between the socialists and conservatives. It's going to be more fluid, more unpredictable, but more comments for you and for us.
Yeah, but also quality of leadership. I mean, that's why this is unraveling, right? I mean, that's why the two-party system in Europe or in the UK is unraveling at the moment because of the quality of our leaders at the moment, the politicians. I mean, that's why this is happening.
Okay,
right?
just a yes or no question for you. Nigel Farage's confidence well placed?
No. I'm not going to say it is, of course not.
He's not going to say it is. Okay. Now, from the Brexit battleground, let's go somewhere else. Let's turn to a very different kind of political standoff featuring a Lord of the Rings star and Spain's Vox party. Let's take a look at this.
The eye of the enemy is moving.
The Lord of the Rings, a film which defined a decade for some, including, it seems, Spain's Vox party. The far-right party tweeted this image last month, a mock-up of the Vox party represented by Aragorn, lining up to do battle with its opponents, including Catalan separatists, LGBT groups, feminists, and the media. But a rebuke from the man who played Aragorn in the blockbuster, writing to El País, Viggo Mortensen said, "You'd have to be pretty ignorant to think that using the character Aragorn from the Lord of the Rings film trilogy to promote the campaign of a xenophobic, far-right party like Vox would be a good idea." He added, "It is even more ridiculous to use the character Aragorn, a multilingual statesman who advocates for the knowledge and inclusion of the different races, traditions, and languages of Middle-earth to legitimize an anti-immigration, anti-feminist, and Islamophobic political party." Or, to put it another way, one does not simply use Aragorn for political propaganda. I mean, he did take that quite seriously, didn't he? But what's interesting is this the way to get to people now? Are we, turning Vox Party, using this to
But also
to
how
get them?
ignorant the far right is. I mean, if they don't know that this guy is a multilingual statesman, I mean, they're muddled up, aren't they? I mean, they'll do just anything. And you saw that also with Bruce Springsteen's music being used by Trump and Bruce Springsteen coming out and saying, "No way, don't use my music." So they try and, get into the celebrity game, but they really do
but does it make any
things.
difference with their voters? I don't think in Spain people are going to even read Viggo Mortensen's statement. what we have to understand is Vox is indeed a new kind of party, far-right, nationalist, and it's
clearly
in fact,
trying to differentiate themselves.
and they're in campaign for the European
Sure.
elections and the local elections, which are even more important than the European ones.
Right.
But the thing is, Spain is in the middle of a big battle for their identity and their unity, and Vox is pushing that, and that's what the picture was saying.
Fabrice, not for the first time.
All right.
Spain has been divided between left and right and far right for a very,
but
very
Okay,
now
we're
it's a
running out of time.
geographic
I
unity.
didn't know this was going to be a big discussion, but we've run out of time there. And coming up on the program, a warning for EU leaders. Libya's UN-backed prime minister says that Europe should brace itself for another migration crisis. That is up next. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, Libya's UN-backed prime minister has a warning for Europe. A failure to end the fighting in Libya could see hundreds of thousands of refugees arriving on its shores. Fayez al-Sarraj is on a European tour to build support as the civil war intensifies back home. And today he met with the French President Emmanuel Macron, fresh off a visit to Germany, and Angela Merkel yesterday. And earlier this week, he sat down with Italian leader Giuseppe Conte, who warned against military intervention in Libya. Well, this diplomatic tour comes amid rising tensions in Libya, and fighting has intensified since the Libyan army chief Khalifa Haftar launched a battle for the capital last month. All right, still with us to discuss this, we have Shada Islam, the Director of Europe and Geopolitics at Friends of Europe. Back with us, Beatrice Rios from Euractiv, and still with us, Fabrice Potier from Rasmussen Global. Okay, the message is clear from al-Sarraj there. A prolonged civil war is as much our problem as yours. So what is Europe going to do about it? Should Europe be more explicit and more active in its intervention in this case? Fabrice?
Well, the paradox is the opposite to Iran. Here, you don't have a European common position. You have as many European foreign policy on Libya as you have member states, especially France and Italy and a few other ones. And however, the problem is choosing between the short term. Haftar is a short-term fix to a terrorism threat, and that's why the French have de facto backed him. And the longer term, which is you need to rebuild a Libyan state and nation, and you need, indeed, a UN-backed government.
Right.
And here, I think it's about whether you can bridge those two short and long terms.
So what can the EU do? Because right now, I think in terms of the migration crisis that al-Sarraj is warning Europe that's coming, and clearly a worry for Europe. There's 230 million euros already given to Niger to stop the flow of migrants. Okay, what else should Europe be doing? Is it throwing money at the problem again?
Well, the problem is that when we're talking about these migration threats, is that Europe has had many years from the first crisis in 2015 to solve the problem by improving the way in which they are managing migration, and they have done nothing. The only thing that Europe has done is been giving money to the countries from where these people are coming, but they are not solving the actual problem these people have, and they are not putting in place a system to actually manage these migration flows. So the problem is that not only you have to stabilize these countries where the people are coming from, in this case Libya, because of a potential civil war. The problem is that we should actually have a common migration and asylum policy that we don't have in place because member states have not been able to agree.
So it's two-pronged. As Fabrice was saying, that there is one on the trying to help solve what's going on the ground, and there is the migration crisis, that another problem that still has no solution. Do you think, though, we're going to see something as bad as what we saw in 2015?
It could be. It could happen, but I would say, what Fabrice said, the strongman illusion of Haftar, right? I mean, he is also being backed by Egypt and Saudi Arabia. Same story. Right. He's going to fight the extremists. We don't know if there's real extremists. I mean, how extreme is he compared to this? So there are all these narratives that come up in Libya at the moment that I'm not convinced are right. The United Nations, meanwhile, has been totally sidelined, right? At the moment, they're struggling. The Americans have changed policy. They're now backing Haftar. So the European Union, as you said, Fabrice, France and Italy, totally divided about who to support. Right. I don't see how the European Union is going to get its act together in the near future. And Beatrice, you're totally right. We've had time. The migration numbers have gone down over the last year almost, or maybe 2 years. And we haven't done anything to improve the situation. We've been doing deals with Turkey, the Libyan Coast Guards. I mean, we've sort of seconded our management to the Libyan Coast Guard of migration.
So
right?
will the Libyan UN-backed leader be getting anything out of his visit with Macron this time? You know, as you said, Macron is de facto supporting the other side. What's going to come out of this?
Well, at least he gets photo opportunities to show that he's.
Well, that doesn't end a civil war, does it?
Yeah, but symbolically it does matter when you have another leader at your door trying to take over your capital.
Okay.
And the paradox is, Haftar launched his military operation the day the UN Secretary General was visiting Libya. And I think that sends a very powerful signal that he's not going to follow the UN. So we are a bit in a bind, but I don't agree with Shada that there is not necessarily a terrorist threat coming from Libya. I think Libya is really the last stretch between the Sahel and Europe. And this is why Haftar and other operatives were important to actually contain the terrorist threat coming from southern Libya.
Yeah, Fabri, I didn't say there's no terrorist threat. I think the narrative, the argument that's being used is always the same, and we fall into the trap of backing the strongman policy. I mean, there is trouble there. Obviously, Islamic State,
so-called. Strongman but weak state is also dangerous.
You know, so, you know, if there is a threat, and I'm sure there is one, it's not always the strongman policies that are right to conquer it, to surmount it, you know, and we fall into the trap over and over again. Sisi changed Trump's mind on this. You know, this is the story.
On a more optimistic tone, so what is the most viable EU response that we might see?
Well, first of all, they need to get their act together and trying to find a common response to the threat, because we don't have a common response. We need to have a united position and trying to get an agreement that France and Italy are not backing completely different leaders, for instance, because then it's impossible to have a common position in the EU, which is what happened last time that the foreign affairs ministers were meeting. They were not able to have a common position and a common statement because they were completely different positions on the issue. So first of all, we need to agree on who do we want to back, and then we have to support that person.
On that note, that is a good place to start for Europe, indeed. Okay, coming up on the program, we do want to know what you think about all of the things that we're talking about. Are you worried about a new migration crisis? Your call is coming up at 7 p.m. Brussels time, and the contact information will be on your screen. There it is. Call us for free at 00800 3333 7002 and join us in the debate. Use the hashtag #RawPolitics on all the social media outlets are there, and our lines are opening soon just after the break.
Pick up your phone, get in touch, it's free.
So what do you think? Should the European Union be cutting Turkey off?
Cutting them off, you're just pushing them in the hands of Russia. Turkey has become the biggest prison for civil libertarians.
Should Europe ditch its royal families?
Oh yeah, absolutely. They're not elected.
What do you reckon? Get rid of the royals?
Every single one of them. What matters is bloodlines. It's like a Game of Thrones or something like that. Royalty is passé.
Royal babies and royalty are not going to go away, are they?
Well, that's because you're an Englishman and you have the English royalty in your blood. I don't believe
Well, welcome back to the program. Those were some of the highlights from last night's Your Call. So a lively discussion there about Turkey and Europe's royal families. And tonight we're doing it all over again. And here's what we're talking about.
We very much hoped that we'd be able to get our exit sorted so that those elections did not have to take place. But legally, they do have to take place.
It's official. The UK will now be taking part in the European Parliament elections. And with the campaign already heating up, Brexit looks set to dominate. Nigel Farage's Brexit party is already holding mass rallies in towns and cities across England. Meanwhile, Change UK is unveiling a cast of well-known candidates, hoping to rise in the polls on the back of the anti-Brexit vote. We want to know, how is Brexit influencing your vote? Fight for control of Libya. As Army Chief Khalifa Haftar tries to seize the capital, Tripoli, the UN-recognized Prime Minister is on a tour of Europe to drum up international support for his government. With migration from Libya to Europe falling from its crisis high, there are fears that an outbreak of violence could provoke a new wave of refugees. So we want to know, are you worried about a new migration crisis? And don't smoke. Cut down your drinking. Stay away from sugar. And exercise more. Every day we're bombarded by government health warnings, But over in Norway, the country's new health minister says she wants to go in a different direction. She says she doesn't want to tell people how to live their lives, smoke, drink, and eat as much red meat as much as you want. The populist politician says people know pretty much what is healthy and what is not healthy. What do you think? Should governments butt out of your health? Come on, Europe, pick up the phone and have your say. How is Brexit influencing your vote? Are you worried about a new migration crisis? And should governments butt out of your health? All right, you know what to do. All of the contact information is on your screen. You can call us for free at 00800 33337 or write to us at rawpoll@euronews.com. And on social media, use the hashtag #RawPolitics. We're in all of them. And you can also look for us on Skype so we can see you. And back with me, we have Shada, Beatrice, and Fabrice. Okay, let's talk about the three topics. So both of you, Fabrice and Beatrice, will be on your call tonight. Let's stick with the question on whether government should put out of our health, because she says, smoke, drink, and eat as much red meat as you want.
She's the health minister?
She is the health minister, because she says that people know what's healthy and what's not.
Right.
Is she right?
No, she's not right at all. People don't know. It's confusing out there. Actually, you need doctors and health experts to tell you what to eat, what to drink. We don't know. Every day the story changes. And she wants headlines. Come on, Tessa. She wants headlines. These days, people crave headlines.
She is a right-wing populist. At the same time, though, she's not shunning any science. She's not saying that don't listen to experts. She's saying, well, the choice should be the people's, not government's.
Obviously, she's playing a bit of a populist game here, trying to make a very intuitive point, saying we should be free to drink and eat whatever we want. However, there's a real question here is how much nanny state, that means how much of a state telling you what you can do and what you can't do, and how much of a minimum state, meaning, laissez-faire. But the problem is the bottom line, the state, public money, will have to pick up the bill. Yeah. And that's why every Western government started to increase price of cigarettes, putting more health warning to reduce what was one of the biggest contagion across the Western world. So I think there's, she's wrong, but there is a real question here.
So why would this appeal to people, though? Why? I mean, it's clearly there's a reason why she's doing this. It's appealing. Why?
Because she's elected by probably, industrial, working class people who... We had the same debate in the UK some years ago. Like, people should be allowed to have a fag and should be allowed to drink and
That's
smoke.
what Nigel Farage says.
Exactly. So I think it's a typical populist.
That's a funny thing. It's not like they are preventing you from buying red meat or drinking or having cigarettes. It's actually, you're free to do it. So, your role as a public servant is actually to send positive messages and to explain to people what are the things that they should be doing to get better health. But then people are actually free to do what they want. So I don't see the point in trying to just mislead people.
So there is no point to be made on, just playing devil's advocate here, on whether people are actually smart enough to know what they should be doing.
Look, provided you give the information, they are, I think, and then it's their choice. But where I disagree a bit is there is indeed this social, often government pressure, in a way making smokers kind of shameful about their habit.
Like a pariah,
and I'm not in favor of those smoking, but I think, we should not make them pariah in our society.
But who's going to pay for cancer treatment? I mean, governments are going abroad.
That's a good question, and we will
pay for all this.
I'm suffering from
Join us on this debate later, because this is going to continue. We have about 45 minutes after the show to talk about this, so get in touch. Do call us at 00800 33337 There it is on your screen. The email is rawpoll@euronews.com. And again, the hashtag is #RawPolitics, and also look for us on Skype. Okay, now we are all very used to political campaign videos. I mean, especially during the election period. Most of them feature candidates making a heavily scripted speech to camera. Well, they try not to seem like it, but one Australian independent candidate, he's gone for a different approach. That's tonight's Raw Moment.
Hello. My name is Alex Dyson, and I'm running as the independent candidate for the seat of Wadden in the federal election. And here are my policies via the medium of interpretive dance.
Sorry, you'll have to react. I'm still.
I think it's excellent. It's like he's redefining political campaigning. And I wish our European leaders, especially, I could not help but think about Merkel and Theresa May should indulge more in this kind of campaigning.
And I would like the men to do it as well. Why just the women?
Exactly. Let's go for it.
Yeah, why
there you go.
May?
I think. All right, we'd love to see our politicians here in Europe do something like that. We'd love to know what you're thinking on all of the stories we're talking about, so do get in touch. And remember, use the hashtag #RawPolitics. We're checking social media now. All right, join us again in a few minutes for your call. Bye.